Every day, there is a battle inside your head. Fear telling you to hesitate, anger telling you to react.
You are not disturbed by events themselves, but by the judgments you place upon them, and the moment you grasp this, your life begins to change. Most people live as if their thoughts are facts, as if every fear deserves attention, every wave of anger deserves obedience, every anxious feeling deserves to be followed to its end. They wake up already tired, not from work, but from the invisible labor of resisting their own mind. They move through the day reacting, bracing, defending, always at the mercy of whatever thought arrives next. And they call this normal. The Stoics did not. They saw this condition clearly for what it is, a life governed from the outside in, a life where the inner citadel has been left unguarded. I want you to understand something immediately, because everything that follows depends on it. Your thoughts are not you. Your emotions are not commands. Your feelings are not orders that must be carried out. They are impressions, signals knocking at the door of your awareness. And discipline begins at the threshold, not by suppressing what appears, not by pretending you feel nothing, but by deciding what you will allow to enter and rule. Fear, anger, and anxiety feel powerful because they arrive with urgency. They speak loudly. They demand immediate action. Fear tells you something bad is coming. Anger tells you something wrong has been done. Anxiety tells you you are not prepared. But urgency is not truth. Volume is not authority. The Stoics trained themselves to pause at this exact moment, to stand between impression and response, because in that space lies your freedom. Consider how often your peace is stolen by things that have not happened. A conversation you replay, a future you imagine, a judgment you assume someone else made about you. Your body reacts as if the threat is real, as if danger is present now. Heart tightens, breath shortens, muscles brace. And yet nothing has actually occurred. Marcus Aurelius warned of this very thing when he wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. He was not offering comfort. He was offering a diagnosis. The Stoic does not ask, "How do I stop feeling this?" The Stoic asks, "Is this within my control?" This single question cuts through confusion like a blade. If the answer is no, then emotional obedience is irrational. If the answer is yes, then disciplined action, not panic, is required. Either way, the emotional storm loses its authority. Anger is perhaps the most seductive emotion because it disguises itself as strength. It tells you that you are justified, that your reaction is proof of your moral clarity. But anger is not power. Anger is loss of command. Seneca described anger as a temporary madness, and madness, no matter how righteous it feels, cannot lead a person toward wisdom. When anger takes the reins, you say things you cannot unsay, do things you must later repair, and surrender the dignity you claim to defend. The Stoic response to anger is not passivity. It is mastery. Mastery means you do not give another person the power to dictate your inner state. Ask yourself honestly, if someone can provoke you at will, who's in control? The Stoic trains to remain unshaken, not because they are indifferent to justice, but because they understand that clarity is impossible when the mind is inflamed. Anxiety, on the other hand, thrives on excess responsibility. It tells you that everything depends on you, that every outcome must be controlled, predicted, and secured. This is arrogance disguised as worry. The Stoics were ruthless in exposing this illusion. You are responsible for your actions, your intentions, your character. You are not responsible for outcomes. You never were. When you confuse the two, anxiety becomes your constant companion. Self-control begins with intellectual honesty. You must be willing to admit how often your suffering is self-generated. Not because you are weak, but because you are human. The mind evolved to scan for threats, not truth. Without training, it will exaggerate danger, personalize neutral events, and cling to worst-case scenarios. Stoicism is that training. It is mental strength built deliberately. day by day, thought by thought. Discipline is not restriction. Discipline is direction. It is choosing what kind of person you will be regardless of circumstances. When you wake up, you do not control what the day will bring, but you do control how you prepare your mind to meet it. The Stoics practiced premeditation not to become pessimistic, but to become resilient. They rehearsed difficulty so that when it arrived, it would not shock them into emotional chaos. Think of the mind as a muscle. Every time you indulge a negative thought without examination, you strengthen it. Every time you obey fear without question, you train yourself to be fearful. Every time you react in anger, you make anger your default. But the opposite is also true. Each time you pause, each time you question an impression, each time you choose restraint over reaction, you build self-command. Self-awareness is the beginning of freedom. Most people are strangers to themselves. They live inside habits of thought they never chose. Stoicism demands that you observe yourself with precision. When fear arises, notice it. Name it. Separate it from reality. Ask what evidence it has. Ask what action, if any, is required. Often the answer is none. Often the correct response is endurance, patience, and silence. This is not about becoming emotionless. The Stoics never argued for numbness. They argued for proportion. Feel what is appropriate to the situation, no more and no less. Do not allow a minor insult to ruin your day. Do not allow uncertainty to paralyze your action. Do not allow discomfort to become catastrophe. Personal growth begins when you stop negotiating with your worst impulses. You do not debate with panic. You do not reason with rage. You acknowledge their presence and then act according to principle instead. This is what it means to live in accordance with reason, the highest Stoic virtue. Right now, you are laying the foundation. Not by force, but by understanding. Not by suppression, but by clarity. The path ahead is not easy, but it is simple. Guard your mind. Train your judgments. Accept what is outside your control. Commit fully to what is within it. Everything else, fear, anger, anxiety, will lose its grip when it realizes it no longer commands you. And this is only the beginning. Once you accept that your inner state is shaped, not by events, but by the meaning you assign to them, a difficult realization follows. If your suffering is created by your judgments, then responsibility returns to you. This is where many people turn away. They want relief without accountability. The Stoic path offers no such bargain. It offers something better, power rooted in truth. You cannot control the first thought that enters your mind. The Stoics never demanded that. Impressions arrive automatically, formed by habit, memory, instinct, and conditioning. But what happens next is where discipline begins. Between the arrival of a thought and your agreement with it, there is a moment. Small, quiet, often overlooked. That moment is where self-mastery lives. Most people collapse that space instantly. A fear appears and they believe it. An insult is perceived and they react. An anxious scenario forms and they follow it to its imagined conclusion. The Stoic trains to slow this process down, not through denial but through examination. Is this thought true? Is it useful? Is it within my control? If the answer is no, then attention is withdrawn. Not angrily, not forcefully. Simply and decisively. This is the discipline of assent, one of the most powerful ideas in Stoic philosophy. You do not have to agree with every thought that presents itself. You are not obligated to endorse every emotional reaction. Assent is a choice, and like any choice, it can be trained. At first it feels unnatural, even uncomfortable. The mind resists, losing its habitual authority. But over time, this practice creates distance between you and your inner turbulence. Fear thrives on this distance being absent. It wants immediacy. It wants you to act before you think. That is why fear often uses physical sensations, tight chest, shallow breath, restlessness to simulate urgency. The Stoic response is to ground attention in what is real and present. What is happening right now, not what might happen later. In most cases, you will find that nothing dangerous is occurring at all. This does not mean you ignore risk. It means you assess it rationally. Courage in the Stoic sense is not the absence of fear, it is the refusal to be ruled by it. A disciplined mind can feel fear and still choose a rational course of action. An undisciplined mind feels fear and calls it fate. Anger, when examined closely, is always rooted in expectation. You expected someone to behave differently. You expected the world to be fair on your terms. You expected recognition, respect, or compliance. When reality fails to meet this expectation, anger erupts. The Stoics found this absurd. Why demand that the world conform to your preferences? Why be shocked when other people act according to their own nature, not yours? Epictetus reminded his students that when someone insults you, they are expressing their own understanding of the world. To take offense is to assume their behavior should be different. This assumption is the real source of anger. Remove it and anger dissolves into clarity. You may still choose to respond, to set boundaries, to pursue justice, but you would do so without surrendering your inner peace. Anxiety is anger turned inward and projected forward. It is the mind fighting a future that does not yet exist. You imagine outcomes, then emotionally react to those imagined outcomes as if they are certain. This creates a loop of tension with no resolution, because there is nothing to resolve yet. The Stoic breaks this loop by returning responsibility to the present moment. Ask yourself, what is required of me right now? Not later. Not if everything goes wrong. Now. Often the answer is simple. Prepare. Act. Rest. Wait. Accept. Anxiety hates simplicity because it thrives on excess. Excess responsibility. Excess anticipation. Excess attachment to outcomes. Self-control is not about rigid suppression. It is about alignment. Your thoughts, emotions, and actions must align with your values, not with your impulses. When they do not, inner conflict arises. This conflict is exhausting. Stoicism resolves it by placing reason at the center of the self. Reason does not mean cold logic. It means the capacity to choose in accordance with what leads to long-term strength rather than short-term relief. Personal growth demands that you confront uncomfortable truths about yourself. One of them is this: many of your emotional reactions are habits. You have practiced them for years. You have rehearsed fear, anger, and anxiety so often that they feel automatic. But habits are learned, and anything learned can be relearned. This is not motivational optimism. It is neurological reality supported by philosophical insight. The Stoics emphasize daily practice because they understood this deeply. You do not master the mind through occasional insight. You master it through repetition. Each day offers countless opportunities to practice restraint, patience, and clarity. Each small victory compounds. Each moment of self-control strengthens the next. Self-awareness sharpens when you begin to observe patterns. Notice what triggers you. Notice when your thoughts spiral. Notice how quickly you assign meaning to events. This observation must be non-judgmental. You are not condemning yourself. You are studying yourself. A general studies terrain before entering battle. The battlefield is your own mind, and ignorance is the greatest vulnerability. Discipline means you no longer live at the mercy of mood. You do not wait to feel ready before acting. You act according to principle, and your emotions follow. This reverses the common order of life, where feelings dictate behavior and character becomes inconsistent. Stoicism restores stability by anchoring behavior in values, not sensations. As this stability grows, something subtle begins to happen. The emotional storms do not disappear, but they lose intensity. They arrive, but they no longer dominate. You feel them as weather passing through, not as forces that define you. This is not detachment from life. It is deeper engagement with it, free from the distortions of unchecked emotion. What you are building now is internal authority, a quiet confidence that comes from knowing you can meet whatever rises without losing yourself. This authority does not announce itself. It is felt in your posture, your speech, your patience. Others may not know why you seem steady, but you will. And with this steadiness, you prepare yourself for the next step, learning how to live fully in the present without being imprisoned by the past or enslaved by the future. To live in the present is not to ignore the past or neglect the future. It is to place each in its proper position. The past is a teacher, not a jailer. The future is a direction, not a threat. Anxiety collapses these distinctions, dragging imagined futures into the present and forcing you to suffer them prematurely. Stoicism restores order by returning your attention to what is real, actionable, and alive right now. Most inner turmoil comes from resistance. You resist what has already happened. You resist what may happen. You resist people being who they are. This resistance creates friction within the mind, and that friction manifests as anger, fear, and anxiety. The Stoics observed that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Suffering arises when the mind argues with reality instead of meeting it. Acceptance, in the Stoic sense, is not resignation. It is clarity. It is seeing what is without distortion and responding wisely. When something has already occurred, no amount of emotional agitation can undo it. To continue reacting is to punish yourself for something beyond your control. Marcus Aurelius urged himself to love whatever happens, not because it is pleasant, but because it is necessary. This was not poetry. It was discipline. Fear weakens when you expose it to daylight. Ask yourself what you are truly afraid of. Loss, rejection, failure, pain, death. The Stoics confronted these directly. They did not soften them. They reasoned with them. Loss is part of life. Rejection is outside your control. Failure is feedback. Pain is temporary. Death is inevitable. When you stop treating these truths as taboo, they lose their power to haunt you. Anxiety often disguises itself as preparation, but it rarely produces action. It produces rumination, endless thinking without movement. The Stoic does not confuse worry with readiness. Readiness is built through deliberate practice, through doing what can be done now and releasing the rest. Anything beyond that is mental noise. Anger, too, loses force when examined honestly. When someone wrongs you, ask what has truly been harmed. Your body, your character, or your pride? Most anger is the defensive ego, not virtue. The Stoic seeks to protect character above all else. No insult can touch it unless you allow it. No injustice can corrupt it unless you participate in corruption yourself. Self-awareness deepens when you recognize how often you seek external validation. Praise feels good. Criticism stings. Both are dangerous if they dictate your inner state. The Stoics trained to become self-sufficient in judgment. To act rightly was enough. To align with virtue was enough. Approval was optional. This does not mean withdrawing from others. It means no longer outsourcing your worth. When you free yourself from this dependency, fear of judgment fades. Anger acts. Misunderstanding dissolves. Anxiety about perception loses relevance. You become grounded in something stable. Discipline is tested most when you are tired, hungry, stressed, or disappointed. This is when old habits resurface. This is when the mind seeks comfort over growth. The Stoics anticipated this. They did not rely on motivation. They relied on structure, morning reflection, evening review, constant reminders of what matters. These were not rituals for spirituality, but tools for resilience. Personal growth is rarely dramatic. It is quiet, incremental, invisible to others. You notice it when you pause before reacting, when you choose silence over retaliation, when you accept discomfort without complaint. These moments do not feel heroic, but they are transformative. Self-control is most powerful when it is internal. You are not restraining yourself because of fear of consequences or desire for praise. You are restraining yourself because you respect yourself, because you refuse to become a lesser version of yourself in moments of pressure. The Stoics believed that the mind should be a fortress, not a marketplace. Thoughts should not come and go freely, shouting over one another, demanding attention. They should be examined, weighed, and admitted selectively. This requires effort. It requires vigilance, but it brings peace that is not dependent on circumstance. As you practice this vigilance, you begin to notice how often negative thoughts repeat themselves. The same worries, the same grievances, the same doubts, Repetition does not make them true, it only makes them familiar. Familiarity breeds acceptance. Stoicism breaks this cycle by demanding evidence and relevance. If a thought offers neither, it is dismissed. This dismissal is not avoidance, it is prioritization. Your attention is limited. Where you place it determines the quality of your life. The Stoic places attention on what strengthens character, sharpens reason, and supports purposeful action. The present moment becomes lighter when it is not burdened by imagined futures or resented pasts. In that lightness, action becomes clearer. You do what must be done without internal resistance. This is not apathy. It is focus. You are not trying to control the world. You are learning to govern yourself within it. This governance brings calm not because life becomes easier, but because you become steadier. Storms still come, loss still happens, people still disappoint. But you are no longer internally shattered by these realities. This steadiness is not the end of the path, it is the foundation. With it, you are ready to confront discomfort intentionally, to strengthen yourself through chosen hardship rather than being broken by unchosen suffering. Is a critical difference between discomfort that weakens you and discomfort that strengthens you. Most people spend their lives trying to avoid all forms of discomfort, and in doing so they become fragile. The Stoics took the opposite approach. They understood that voluntary hardship builds the resilience required to face involuntary hardship when it inevitably arrives. Fear grows in comfort. Anxiety multiplies when the mind is untested. Anger erupts most easily when expectations are soft and reality intrudes. The Stoic trains against this by deliberately stepping in to control difficulty, not as punishment but as preparation. Cold, hunger, silence, physical exertion, restraint. These were not extremes but reminders. Reminders that the body can endure more than the mind believes, and that the mind can be taught to remain calm under pressure. This training is not about proving toughness to others. It is about establishing trust with yourself. When you willingly face discomfort and survive it with composure, something fundamental shifts. Fear loses credibility. Anxiety loses its leverage. You no longer believe every warning your mind produces, because you have evidence, lived evidence that you can endure. Anger, too, weakens when you no longer depend on comfort. Much of anger comes from entitlement, the belief that things should be easy, fair, pleasant, or predictable. The Stoic abandons this belief, not cynically, but realistically. Life is change, life is friction, life is uncertainty. When you accept this fully, anger has far less room to operate. Self-discipline is the structure that allows this acceptance to become stable. Without discipline, insight fades. Without routine, clarity dissolves. The Stoics understood that the mind left unattended will drift back to its old patterns. That is why discipline must be daily, not intense, not dramatic, consistent. You wake up and prepare your mind before the world touches it. You remind yourself that you will encounter difficulty, that people will act according to their nature, not your preferences, that events will unfold without consulting your comfort. This does not harden you, it centers you. When the expected arrives, it no longer shocks. At the end of the day, you review yourself honestly, not to condemn but to correct. Where did you react instead of respond? Where did emotion overrule reason? Where did you surrender your inner authority? This review is not about guilt. Guilt is useless. Correction is powerful. Tomorrow becomes an opportunity to refine, not to repeat. Personal growth accelerates when you stop lying to yourself about your triggers. You know what provokes you. You know where you are weakest. Avoiding these truths keeps you trapped. Facing them gives you leverage. The Stoics were relentless in this self-examination, not because they were obsessed with self-improvement, but because they valued freedom above comfort. Freedom, in the Stoic sense, is not doing whatever you want, it is wanting what is reasonable. It is aligning desire with reality so that frustration no longer dominates your emotional life. When you desire only what depends on you, your effort, your integrity, your response you become difficult to disturb. Anxiety often returns when you forget this distinction. You begin to desire outcomes again. You fixate on results. You tie your peace to success, approval, or certainty. The Stoic gently but firmly cuts this tie. You act with excellence and release the outcome. This is not indifference, it is maturity. Self-control is tested most in moments of emotional intensity. When anger flares, the body prepares for action. Heart rate rises, muscles tense. The Stoic does not deny this physiological response. They acknowledge it and refuse to let it dictate behavior. They slow their breath. They pause their speech. They allow the wave to pass without riding it into regret. This pause is a skill. It must be practiced when stakes are low, so it is available when stakes are high. Each successful pause strengthens the next. Over time, the gap between impulse and action widens. In that gap, choice becomes possible. Fear, when met with repeated calm exposure, begins to shrink. Not because the world becomes safer, but because your confidence becomes grounded. You trust your capacity to respond. You trust your judgment. You trust your values. This trust cannot be imagined into existence. It must be earned through experience. The Stoics spoke often of living in accordance with nature. This did not mean living passively. It meant understanding the nature of things, impermanence, uncertainty, limitation, and aligning behavior accordingly. When you fight these realities, you suffer. When you work with them, you grow. Self-awareness deepens as you recognize how much energy you waste resisting what is unavoidable. Complaining internally. Rehearsing grievances. Replaying mistakes. None of this improves the present. The Stoic releases it not through force, but through understanding its futility. As resistance fades, energy returns. That energy can be directed toward purposeful action, toward discipline, toward service, toward building a character that remains stable regardless of external conditions. This stability is not rigidity. It is flexibility anchored in principle. You begin to move through life with less internal noise. Decisions become clearer. Emotions become signals, not commands. You feel deeply, but you are not controlled by what you feel. This is not suppression. It is integration. The path you are walking now is demanding. It asks you to give up familiar forms of suffering. It asks you to stop indulging reactions that feel justified but weaken you. It asks you to take responsibility not just for what you do, but for how you think. But in exchange, it offers something rare, a mind that cannot easily be shaken. With this foundation of discipline and voluntary hardship, you are prepared to face the most subtle challenge of all the stories you tell yourself about who you are and who you believe you must be. The most persistent source of suffering is not what happens to you, but the story you attach to it. Long after an event has passed, the narrative remains, replaying itself, shaping your identity, reinforcing your fears. The Stoics understood that if you do not consciously author this story, it will be written by habit, insecurity, and emotion, and that story will quietly govern your life. You tell yourself who you are based on what has hurt you. You tell yourself what you can handle based on moments when you felt overwhelmed. You tell yourself what is possible based on past failures. These stories feel true because they are familiar, but familiarity is not evidence. It is repetition. Stoicism challenges you to separate facts from interpretations and to loosen your grip on narratives that no longer serve your growth. Identity, when left unexamined, becomes a prison. You begin to act in ways that confirm the story you believe. If you see yourself as anxious, you interpret uncertainty as threat. If you see yourself as easily angered, you justify explosive reactions. If you see yourself as fragile, you avoid challenge. The Stoic refuses to define himself by passing states. He defines himself by chosen principles. This does not mean denying your experiences. It means refusing to let them become destiny. What happened to you matters. What you do with it matters more. The Stoics did not ask, "Why did this happen to me?" They asked, "What does this demand of me now?" This shift alone dissolves much of the bitterness that fuels anger and the helplessness that feeds anxiety. Fear thrives when you believe your current capacity is fixed, when you assume that what overwhelms you now will always overwhelm you. The Stoics rejected this assumption. They believed character could be trained, strengthened, refined, not through wishful thinking but through disciplined action. Each time you face what you once avoided, the story changes. Not suddenly, but decisively. Anger often persists because it is tied to identity. You see yourself as someone who does not tolerate disrespect, someone who must react to be strong. But strength does not require volatility. True strength is the ability to choose restraint without feeling diminished. The Stoic learns to detach ego from reaction, to respond from reason rather than wounded pride. Anxiety attaches itself to stories of inadequacy, that you are not prepared, that you will fail, that you cannot handle what is coming. These stories are projections, not prophecies. They are guesses masquerading as certainty. The Stoic treats them as such. He prepares diligently and then releases the outcome. He refuses to rehearse disaster as if it were inevitable. Self-awareness grows when you notice how often you speak to yourself in ways you would never speak to another person. Harsh, absolutist, condemning. The Stoics believed that inner dialogue should be rational and fair, not indulgent but just. You correct yourself firmly, without cruelty. You acknowledge error without collapsing into shame. Shame paralyzes growth. It keeps you focused on who you were, instead of who you are becoming. The Stoic replaces shame with responsibility. Responsibility says, "This is mine to address. This is mine to improve." It does not dwell on self-loathing. It moves toward action. Discipline becomes sustainable when it is connected to identity. You do not practice restraint because you are forcing yourself. You practice it because it aligns with who you are choosing to be. Each disciplined action reinforces this identity. Over time, the story shifts from struggle to steadiness. Personal growth accelerates when you stop waiting for confidence. Confidence is not a prerequisite for action. It is a byproduct of action. The Stoics did not wait to feel fearless. They acted in accordance with reason despite fear. Courage was defined not by absence of emotion, but by alignment with principle under pressure. Self-control is refined when you stop dramatizing inner discomfort. A thought arises. An urge appears, you notice it. You do not inflate it. You do not build a narrative around it. You let it pass. This simplicity is powerful. Much suffering comes from unnecessary elaboration. The mind loves complexity because complexity gives emotion room to hide. Stoicism strips situations down to their essentials. What is happening? What is within my control? What action aligns with virtue? Everything else is noise. As these questions become habitual, clarity increases. Decisions feel cleaner. Regret decreases. You are no longer pulled in multiple directions by competing stories about who you should be. You are anchored in chosen values. This anchoring brings a quiet confidence, not arrogance, not bravado, confidence rooted in consistency. You know how you will act because you have practiced acting that way. You trust yourself not because you are perfect, but because you are deliberate. Fear, anger, and anxiety still appear. They always will. The Stoics never promised emotional immunity. They promised emotional literacy. You can read these states without being consumed by them. You can listen without obeying. The story you tell yourself begins to change tone. Less victimhood, less resentment, more agency, more responsibility, more acceptance. This does not make life easier. It makes you stronger. And with this strengthened identity, you are prepared to confront the deepest attachment of all, the attachment to outcomes. And the illusion that your peace depends on how things turn out. Attachment to outcomes is one of the most subtle and destructive habits of the mind. It disguises itself as ambition, responsibility, or care, but beneath the surface it is a demand placed on reality. This must go my way, or I will suffer. The Stoics saw clearly that this demand is the root of anxiety, disappointment, and much of our anger. When peace depends on results, peace is never secure. You can act with discipline, skill, and integrity, and still not get the outcome you desire. This is not failure, it is the nature of reality. The Stoic prepares for this truth not by lowering effort but by relocating meaning. Meaning is placed in the quality of action, not in the guarantee of reward. When you understand this, anxiety loses its grip, because there is nothing left to protect emotionally. Fear often arises when you imagine the cost of failure, loss of status, loss of comfort, loss of approval. But what is truly lost when an outcome does not go as planned? Your character remains intact. Your capacity to act remains. Your ability to choose remains. The Stoics measured success by internal criteria precisely because external ones are unstable. Anger frequently follows unmet expectations. You expected fairness. You expected recognition. You expected effort to be rewarded proportionally. Reality does not operate this way. The Stoic accepts this without bitterness, not because injustice is acceptable, but because bitterness only harms the one who carries it. Action can be taken without emotional poisoning. Anxiety at its core is the mind trying to control what it cannot. It rehearses, predicts, and strategizes endlessly, believing that enough thought will create certainty. It never does. The Stoic interrupts this cycle by acting where action is possible and practicing acceptance where it is not. This division is simple but not easy. It must be reinforced constantly. Self-control matures when you no longer need outcomes to validate you. Praise becomes pleasant but unnecessary. Criticism becomes information, not a verdict. Success becomes an opportunity to refine, not to inflate the ego. Failure becomes a lesson, not an identity. This emotional independence is one of the Stoics' greatest strengths. Personal growth deepens when you notice how often you postpone peace. You tell yourself you will relax when things settle down, when goals are reached, when problems are solved. This postponement creates chronic tension. The Stoic understands that life is never without challenge. Peace must be practiced in motion, not reserved for an imaginary future. This does not mean complacency, it means presence. When you are fully engaged in the process, attention is absorbed by the task, not scattered by worry about results. This focus improves performance. Ironically, releasing attachment often leads to better outcomes, because fear and anxiety no longer interfere with judgment. Self-awareness sharpens when you observe how your mood fluctuates with external events. A compliment lifts you, a setback deflates you. This volatility is a signal of misplaced dependence. The Stoic gradually shifts this dependence inward, anchoring mood in effort and intention rather than circumstance. Discipline supports this shift by creating internal standards. You know what it means to do your best today. You know whether you acted with honesty, courage, and restraint. These standards are always available. They do not change with fortune. They give you a stable measure of self-respect. Fear of the future weakens as trust in this internal compass grows. You no longer need certainty because you trust your ability to respond. You no longer need guarantees because you are committed to acting well regardless of outcome. This trust is not blind optimism. It is earned through repeated alignment between intention and action. Anger fades when you stop interpreting outcomes as personal verdicts. The world is not rewarding or punishing you. It is unfolding according to causes far larger than you. When you release the need to be favored by events, resentment loses its fuel. Anxiety diminishes when you stop asking the future to behave. You prepare, you act, and you accept. This rhythm becomes natural, effort followed by release, engagement followed by rest. This balance prevents burnout and emotional exhaustion. The Stoics emphasize that tranquility is not found in avoiding life, but in meeting it correctly. Correctly means with clear judgment, disciplined action, and emotional restraint. When you practice this consistently, your nervous system begins to settle. The constant alertness fades. You are present without being tense. As attachment loosens, something unexpected happens. You begin to enjoy effort for its own sake. You take pride in discipline. You find satisfaction in self-mastery. These rewards are immediate and durable. They do not depend on applause or outcomes. You become less reactive because there is less at stake emotionally. Loss is still loss, but it is no longer catastrophic. Failure still stings, but it does not define you. Still pleases, but it does not intoxicate you. With this emotional independence, you are ready to confront the final challenge, sustaining this way of life over time, especially when motivation fades and routine threatens to become mechanical. What determines whether this philosophy remains a temporary inspiration or becomes a permanent way of life is not motivation. Motivation is unreliable. It rises and falls with mood, energy, and circumstance. The Stoics knew this well. That is why they built their lives around commitment rather than enthusiasm. They did not ask themselves how they felt about discipline. They asked what was required of them, and they did it regardless. Routine is where philosophy is tested, not in moments of crisis, but in ordinary days when nothing dramatic is happening. This is when the mind grows lazy. This is when old habits whisper that vigilance is no longer necessary. This is when fear, anger, and anxiety quietly attempt to re-establish themselves not through force but through neglect. The Stoic anticipates this. He understands that the absence of struggle does not mean the absence of danger. The danger is complacency. The belief that mastery, once achieved, no longer requires effort. But the mind, like the body, weakens without use. Self-control erodes when it is not exercised. Awareness dulls when it is not sharpened. This is why Stoicism is not a phase. It is a practice, a way of orienting yourself toward reality every day. You remind yourself in the morning who you intend to be. You remind yourself in the moment what is within your control. You remind yourself in the evening where you succeeded and where you fell short. This repetition is not empty. It is formative. Fear often returns subtly at this stage, disguised as doubt. Doubt that your efforts matter. Doubt that restraint is worth it. Doubt that you are truly changing. The Stoic meets this doubt with evidence, not reassurance. Look at how you respond now compared to before. Look at what no longer provokes you. Look at how quickly you recover when you do falter. Progress is not the absence of mistakes. It is the speed of correction. Anger resurfaces when you grow tired. Fatigue lowers resistance. This is not a moral failure. It is a physiological reality. The Stoic accounts for this by respecting the body. Rest is not indulgence. It is maintenance. A depleted mind cannot remain disciplined. To neglect rest is to invite emotional instability. Anxiety reappears when routine becomes mechanical. When reflection fades and action continues without awareness. At that point, effort becomes hollow and the mind begins to question its purpose. The Stoic restores meaning by reconnecting action to values. Why do you practice restraint? Why do you accept discomfort? Why do you refuse to be ruled by impulse? Because this is how a rational, dignified human being lives. Self-discipline must remain conscious to remain alive. You are not building habits to operate blindly. You are building habits to support clarity. When clarity fades, habits must be examined, adjusted, and renewed. This flexibility prevents rigidity, which is another form of weakness. Personal growth over time reveals a paradox. The more disciplined you become, the less effort discipline seems to require. What once felt forced becomes natural. What once required vigilance becomes instinct. This is not because you have eliminated temptation, but because you have reduced its appeal. You no longer find chaos attractive. Self-awareness deepens as you begin to sense imbalance early. You notice when irritation lingers longer than it should. You notice when worry occupies too much space. You notice when pride begins to inflate. These signals allow for correction before collapse. This is wisdom in action. The Stoics believed that a good life is a series of correct moments, not a single achievement. There is no finish line, there is only continued alignment. This removes pressure. You are not trying to become perfect, you are trying to become consistent. Consistency is what protects you when life becomes difficult again, as it inevitably will. Loss will come. Disappointment will return. People will act unjustly. Plans will unravel. But these events no longer define your internal state. They are challenges to meet, not threats to endure. Fear diminishes when you realize that you have faced difficulty before and remained intact. Anger fades when you understand that losing composure only compounds harm. Anxiety weakens when you trust your capacity to respond rather than predict. At this stage, Stoicism stops feeling like a philosophy you are practicing and starts feeling like a posture you inhabit. You stand differently in the world, not rigid but grounded, not detached but composed. Others may sense this without being able to name it. You speak less reactively. You listen more carefully. You act more deliberately. Silence becomes comfortable. Waiting becomes tolerable. Discomfort becomes familiar. None of this makes life smaller. It makes it clearer. This clarity brings with it a quiet responsibility. You become an example, whether you intend to or not. Not through preaching, but through presence, through steadiness under pressure, through restraint in moments of provocation, through calm when others panic. And yet the work is never finished. The final test of this path is not whether you can maintain discipline when things are stable, but whether you can return to it when you fall away. Because you will fall away. Everyone does. What matters is not the fall, but the return. And that return requires one final understanding: how to meet failure, weakness, and imperfection, without abandoning the path you have chosen.